And I just always drank, and on the weekends I drank a lot, and there were a lot of fights because of alcohol. And I remember the day that I went underground and started squirreling my drinking away and hiding it was when my wife said, you know, I think we drink too much. I think that that's the source of our problems. And I think we should quit for 30 days. And I remember the panic attack that was in my stomach. It was like somebody kicked me in the stomach. Finally, she called me an alcoholic, and it was like she'd stung me, slapped me across the face.
This is The Bottom Line. I'm Gary Thiemann in Los Angeles. When you think of an alcoholic, do you think of the stereotypical Skid Row bum? Well, this might change your whole perspective on just what an alcoholic is. This is a walk from humble beginnings in Boise, Idaho, to a successful career in television and major motion pictures. But there was a dark side fueled by the bottle that exploded in rage, fear, insecurity, and a loneliness that could only be told by someone who lost a spouse. An honest account of experience, strength, and hope, dedicated to the still practicing alcoholic.
My name is Earl, and I'm an alcoholic. I had my first drink, the best of my recollection, when I was about 18 and a half or 19. I know it was wintertime, and a bunch of the college buddies and I at the local college in Boise, Idaho, a little two-year college, we were out in the wintertime. There was a big test that was coming up later in the afternoon, and somebody had a bowl of cheap, sweet wine, and the stuff was passed around, and it came to be my turn, and I'd never had any, and my mother had always warned me that my father had been an alcoholic, and I tried it, and I got quite tipsy, along with everybody else, went in and took the test, and I was rather embarrassed by the fact that I had had booze, and managed to sober up before I went home to my mother, although she may have suspected. But I didn't have another drink until quite some time later, about 3 years later. And I guess my birthday came up, and this guy I was working with had a very wealthy aunt and so forth. So he brought in a rather fantastic old silver ice bucket, and then it were 2 beers. And he gave me a beer, and I went, wow, this is nice. And by the end, that was sort of in the middle of the summer, and by the end of the summer, I remember my first real drunk, where he and I sat and had gimlets, and I remember that I was the one that finished the bottle. And the next day I had dry heaves and all that sort of thing, and swore that I would never ever touch the stuff again, because I was really very, very sick, and it was vodka, which always sort of paralyzed my upper lip and the back of my neck. I always felt like I had a steel clamp on the stuff. I never liked vodka, and that's of course what I wound up drinking most of the time. By the next year, when I was 21, I was drinking very heavily already in college. And I remember waking up at a party one time where I had drunk everybody else till they'd passed out. I finally passed out, woke up the next morning, and with a cat looking down on me, snow blowing through a window that would not shut, with everyone passed out. Now, I had passed out after everyone else, and I got up, and the first thing I did was to go around and check to see if there was any booze that I could have. And I went around and found, an 1/8 of an inch in this and an 1/8 of an inch in that, and of course that was the hair of the dog, and it sort of worked. A teacher at that time said, I think you ought to ease off on the drinking at parties. I think you're celebrating a little too much. My drinking just progressed. It progressed exactly the way it says in the book. It's a progressive disease, I know that, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. However, I always vowed I would never drink on the job, and but I would drink before a job. I worked in the evenings primarily, and I was an actor, and still am, but I was a stage actor at that time. So I would manage to drink a few drinks before a performance. It would always relax me. It got me loose. Stage fright is part of my problem, I guess. Stage fright for a lot of people. I didn't really know that I had stage fright, but I know I felt a lot better with a couple of drinks in me. And then I'd go put my makeup on, get dressed. By that time, most of the effects of the alcohol had worn off to the point that it was detrimental, and the detrimental effects had worn off. And I, would get ready and go on stage and do my stuff, and I felt loose and relaxed. But it really wasn't too many years until I met my wife, and my drinking was pretty, ordinary. I always drank. I drank at nights, sometimes before the performance, and not during the performance at that time. But there were, large fights with my wife because she, I would just act irrationally, and we'd cut back a little bit and all that sort of thing, and then she would try to keep up with me and try to match me drink for drink, but she never could because she was a normie who was just trying to match an alcoholic, and alcoholic who just can't get enough. I finally made a career switch in the mid-'70s and moved to Hollywood and started working right away. Again, I didn't want to drink on the job, but I would drink before or after. Usually not before, because 6 a.m. calls, you really can't go in with a buzz at that hour, at that time. And I just always drank, and on the weekends I drank a lot, and there were a lot of fights because of alcohol. And I remember the day that I went underground and started squirreling my drinking away and hiding it was when my wife said, I think we drink too much. I think that's the source of our problems. And I think we should quit for 30 days. And I remember the panic attack that was in my stomach. It was like somebody kicked me in the stomach. How did I go through 30 days without booze? And I agreed to it, and then I started sneaking it all the time. The progression got worse. I had to drink in a smaller amount of time, so I had to consume more in order to get the effects that I needed. Because I couldn't drink around her for those 30 days, I started drinking on the job and before the job, 6 a.m. calls or not. I'd stop and get a bottle of booze and have a couple of snorts and then go and perform. And I became more and more paranoid. It kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I became more and more paranoid. Finally, I got to the point that I was a daily drinker at any time of the day or night that I could get to booze without being discovered by my wife. Well, that's almost impossible, as we all know, because it's reeking from your pores. And, we'd have fights because, are you drinking? No, I'm not. Well, what's the matter with you? I'm just so tired. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. The usual alcoholic excuse. Finally, she called me an alcoholic, and it was like she'd stung me, slapped me across the face or something. And it was on that night that I went to my first AA meeting. I didn't understand these people. I went to there people can't get $65 together to fix a fuel pump on their car or a water pump or something like this. And I'm thinking, well, they got nothing. I mean, $65 is nothing. And I remember the first meeting when they passed the basket around. I grandiosely reached into my pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, and this wonderful old black gentleman next to me, who I found out later had like 30 years of sobriety, said, "You don't have to put in anything." I said, "No, I can afford it. I can afford it." Well, I kind of played around with going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous for, about 3 years, I think it was. And I usually would go when I was in great pain, or I'd go and tell my wife that I was going, and I would go ahead and drink before or after the meeting. And she'd be asleep when I came home, and I'd sleep on the couch. That became my sleeping arrangements most nights, because she really didn't want to have a hell of a lot to do with me as a person. There were fights constantly. And I remember my last drunk, which happened on October 20th, 1987. I had sworn that morning that I was not going to do what I had done the day before. I was not going to get so drunk that I couldn't function and get so angry. I was running on absolute rage. And I did not want to terrorize her verbally again. I'd gotten past any physical kinds of things. I just needed a little something to take the edge off, and I was shaking if I didn't have booze in my system. I was always shaking, so I had to keep drinking. And I had work that day, and I had auditions, and I had to get through the day. So I just needed something to take the edge off. And that night I came home, once again drunk, once again filled with rage. It was everybody else's fault, not mine. They just would leave me alone, leave me alone, leave me alone. And everybody was always at me. They always wanted something from me. My agents wanted something from me. My wife wanted something from me. People wanted something from me. And we had a massive fight that went on for 2-3 hours in terms of screaming and carrying on. And finally I passed out at about 6:15 on the night of October 20th. And I woke up at 2:38 in the morning on October 21st, 1987. And I heard in my head, now you get to AA. And what was really the next thought in the head was, this is not working. I can't go on like this. I can't keep drinking. I don't want to drink anymore. And I knew from playing around with AA in those 3 or 3.5 years that I had always felt better after a meeting. I didn't always feel 100% better, but I always felt better if I spend that hour and a half listening to other people. I always calmed down. I usually go in crying and moaning, poor me, and by the end of it I'd calm down, and then I'd go home and I'd get a decent night's rest. So I rummaged in my desk and found the big book, which I hadn't thrown away, and a meeting directory from 2 or 3 years before, and there was central office number. So at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm creeping around because I don't want to wake my wife because I don't want to have another fight. And I called the central office and said, where is there a meeting? I need a meeting as early as you can because I've been drinking, I'm still drunk, but I've got to stop. I want to go to a meeting, and I have to be at work at 9 o'clock. So the guy gave me a meeting in rather a seedy part of town. And I said, all right, that's fine, I'll be there. And he says, do you need somebody to pick you up? I said, nope, I can do it. I wouldn't want them to know who I was or where I lived, so I got myself showered and cleaned up and shaved and got into a 3-piece suit. And of course, like any good alcoholic, I finished the half of the half pint that I had tucked away in my last hiding place that she didn't know about. Got myself into the car and went to a 7 a.m. meeting. And it was that day, October 21st, 1987, that I knew that it was over for me. I finally surrendered.
Earl found peace in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a safe haven for him to share with people who knew exactly what he was feeling and what he was going through.
I was very embarrassed because I was reeking of alcohol. But nobody said no, go away, come back when you haven't had booze. I was welcomed, I sat down. And the only thing I remembered from what was being said was at the beginning of the meeting, they say, if you have had anything to drink in the last 24 hours, we ask that you do not share, but come back tomorrow. But I came back the next day, and I told them that I was an alcoholic. And I felt good, I felt relief. Because for the first time I knew what my problem was. It was booze. And it was me. It wasn't anybody else. It wasn't my wife. It wasn't the career. It wasn't the lack of career. It wasn't that I didn't achieve the heights that I intended or that I'd achieved too much and everybody was at me. It was simply the fact that I was an alcoholic. I was suicidal for the first 6 months of my sobriety. First 6 years of my sobriety. And finally, it seemed like every meeting I went to was about step 3. But I go to meetings and have been going to meetings as often as I possibly can, which is usually 3 to 4 times a week. And I've stayed sober since that time, of October 21st, 1987. And I use that as my sobriety date because that was my date of decision. Since that time, my priorities have completely changed. One of the great benefits that I've found in AA was when I was about 6 months sober, I saw somebody take a 5-year cake. And he said his greatest benefit was that he had learned that he no longer had to define himself by what he does for a living. And a rocket went off in my head because I had always identified with being an actor. That was all I ever wanted to be. That's what I was. That's what I lived for. But that was a liberating thing, and I began to change my priorities to the point that it's just a job for me now. I still enjoy the work. I don't enjoy the life, and I haven't for some time. And so my wife and I, not having had children on purpose because we wanted to retire early. I was lucky enough not to lose her when I got sober. And we worked through it. She was a very tenacious lady, and I say was because earlier this year she died of ovarian cancer after 62 days, and we were ready to retire, and she didn't get to do what our dream was, which was to just go and enjoy ourselves for the last years of our lives. She went down before me.
Through enormous change, Earl found that he wasn't alone. His higher power was right there next to him, offering him the 12 steps and promises of Alcoholics Anonymous.
How God is working in my life is that I'm not drinking. I'm going through this. It's very painful. I hate it. I hate loneliness, and I know what loneliness really is. It's the fear that you're never going to be loved again. It's finally come very clear to me what loneliness is. I always enjoyed being alone or having time to myself. And I used to feel that, being alone was a good thing. But being alone is easy if you have someone there when you want to be with them and when they want to be with you. Loneliness, you're just by yourself. But I'm not really by myself, I guess, because the higher power, which again I can only describe as the force of goodness in the universe. I can't come up with any other concept that makes sense to me. But that's good enough for me. That I do not want to go back to what I was before. I don't want to go back to a slobbering, slurry drunk with no self-esteem whatsoever. So I go through the pain. And my higher power keeps me going. I just don't have to drink today. And that's about as good as I can do some days. I just don't have to drink. I just have to go through the pain, the sorrow, the sadness, the loneliness. And I've got a chance at a better day tomorrow. And that's all that's ever promised in AA. I mean, the promises are wonderful. But, they do come true, more or less. But life is difficult, and it changes all the time. And we have to embrace change. Because it's going to change whether you like it or not. And that's one of the things that I've learned. God saw fit to take my wife. And with that, I don't have rage anymore. I don't have anger anymore. I appreciate each day for what it is, because that's all I've got. And I don't get things my way all the time, but I don't have to be angry about them, and I don't have to be frustrated all the time. What is worth doing is just going through life as best you can, as easy as you can. So I stay sober one day at a time, and for that I am very, very thankful to my higher power and the people and the principles of AA.
I waited in the quiet place, away from cares and company. My soul's desire to see your face, to calm the storm and rage in me. Then in that silent hour you came, invisible, no voice to call, without a sound but just the same, spoke in a way the best of all. And in that moment I believed senses may deceive. There's nowhere else for me to go. In my deepest heart you dwell, and speak the words which in me burn. Love creates love, and so well that love calls for love in return. In return.
You've been listening to The Bottom Line, featuring Earl's story. Earl, thank you so much for being of service and giving it back. And I'd also like to thank Earl's wife, Carol, who gave me encouragement while I was developing The Bottom Line back in August of 1986. Carol, your gentle spirit lives on. This show is produced for Armed Forces Radio, heard coast to coast and around the world. I'm Gary Thiemann. Until next time, God bless you, and share the message, won't you? This has been a GRT production.